Hello again, everybody. Don Stevens, HorseManDon here on the HorseManDon YouTube channel. So glad you're with us today. Hope everybody is safe and well at home. As you my good friends Jim and Michael are at home because we're obeying all the health rules now, trying to stay safe, and hopefully we can get back to some normal life somewhere down the road. But anyway, I still haven't shaven. Got my Hollywood Park hat on for today's discussion, which is about the 1980s. Jim called a lot of great horses out at Hollywood Park in the 80s before coming to Remington Park in 88. Actually came here before that, but the track opened in 88 at Remington. So he's got some great memories to share. Michael was kind enough to give me his top 5 horses from the 1980s. Some great names in there. We have some video to throw in. Thank you, Jim, so much for that. But to get us in the 80s mood here, let's talk 80s a little bit. I'm going to tell you where I was at the beginning and end of the decade. You were, and then I'll give you a few facts about the 80s, and we'll dive into the horses, okay? So good to see you guys today. All right, the beginning of January 1, 1980, I was a captain of my high school basketball team in Kent, Washington. It was a private school, small school. It's a big school. I would have never been on the team, but I was the captain of the team. My highlight was an 18-point performance one year. That was the highlight of my offensive career, and so I was chugging through high school. It was my 11th grade year. I graduated after 11th grade, my junior year, and I never did go to my senior year because my school closed, but I got enough credits to graduate. So that's what I was doing at the start of the decade. The end of the decade, I lived in Mustang, Oklahoma. I bought my first house, was married to my first wife, didn't have any kids yet, and I loved going to Remington Park. That was 1989, right after it opened. So, Jim, where were you at the beginning, end of the decade?
I was in San Diego. I was attending San Diego State in January of 80. We were in between. We had a semester system there. So we had, I think, completed the fall semester. We're waiting for the spring semester. I remember the early part of 80 because not only the U.S. hockey team victory, which was in obviously late February of 80, but also my dad underwent a bypass surgery in early February of 80. And the surgery was not unheard of or even brand new then, but it was in its earlier stages. And so it carried a lot more risks than it did in later years and more recent years. He made it through that surgery just fine. He wound up living actually 24 years after that bypass. So that's what I remember about the start of the decade. The end of the decade, I was not very far from here. I had left Hollywood and wound up coming to Remington. I didn't leave Hollywood directly for Remington. It just worked out that way. But I was living in Oklahoma City in a different house than the one I'm in now, but calling races at Remington. And 89 was an interesting year. It was another big year at Remington. The first 2 years were huge before the declines began to kind of creep in a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Michael, what about your story about the 80s?
Well, in 1980, I was in 5th grade in New Jersey.
Oh.
I was still living in the Garden State at that time. And then at the end of the decade, my family had moved cross country to Arizona. And in 1989 into 1990, I was attending Arizona State University. And at that point, since I started in 88, I was in my sophomore year going to school. I was working at the college radio station, KASR, doing sports reporting and disc jockeying and all kinds of things that they were asking me to do. So I was just getting my foot into the broadcasting business, as it were, out at Arizona State University in Tempe.
Now, that's something you guys have in common, right? Jim, didn't you do that in college as well? Sure. And you went to college with a very famous baseball player. Tell us about that real quick.
Yeah, Tony Gwynn's time at San Diego State pretty much matched up with mine. I was the freshman manager, student manager of the basketball team, his second year, my first year, and got to know him fairly well. Later covered him when I worked for the campus radio station when he was playing baseball. And also crossed paths. I didn't know him, but covered Michael Cage, who's now the Oklahoma City Thunder color commentator. Obviously had a long NBA career. Yeah. He came into San Diego State the latter part of my college career. But Tony was an all-time favorite, no doubt.
Yeah, great guy, classy guy.
And while I was at Arizona State, just to throw out a name that I am familiar with from their baseball program, Paul LaDuca was there. And of course, Paul has now made his inroads into the thoroughbred industry with his work at TVG and some other outlets. He's gone on to do some really good things in horse racing. So I do have a little connection with him, as I called some of his games while we were out at Packard Stadium, as they used to call it back in the day at Arizona State.
Pretty cool. Okay, we got that out of the way. Let me give you some quick facts about the 80s. We'll dive into the horses. Did you know that seatbelts were first required to be put into cars in 1968, but in 1984 was the first time that they actually required you to wear them? Isn't that crazy? Anyway, the most popular artist of the 80s in song would be, you guys can guess this, right?
Michael Jackson.
Right, exactly. Michael Jackson. Did you know the movie Top Gun in the 80s actually won an Academy Award? I didn't know this till I looked it up. You know what it was for?
Cinematography?
I've never seen Top Gun, so I couldn't tell you.
You haven't watched that? No.
Was it a technical award?
Song, Take My Breath Away. So
okay.
Song movie. Yeah, pretty cool. MTV debuted August 1981. Do you remember when that happened? I remember as a kid. Well, I was graduating high school that year. The Miracle on Ice, Jim, you kind of jumped me on this one. That was, of course, in the Winter Olympics at Lake Placid. The line was, "Do you believe in miracles?" And you guys know who said it, right?
Al Michaels.
Of course.
Al Michaels, absolutely.
Fellow Arizona State graduate, I might add.
There you go. And one of our all-time favorite restaurants was established on April 1st, 1983 in Clearwater, Florida. Can you name it? Hooters. Come on, guys. Hooters.
Oh, okay.
I had to throw that in. Okay.
I thought the Lookout was your favorite restaurant.
Yeah. Let's go back and forth with the horses now. We're going to give you or talk about
I don't care what else we say the rest of the show. That's the line of the afternoon right there.
We're going to give you Jim's favorite 5 horses of the 1980s that he called, and we're giving you Michael's what he thinks are the best horses of the 80s, since Michael and I never called a race in the 80s, right, Michael?
That's correct.
Okay. All right, let's start with Jim. Give us a memory, Jim, of one of the 5 top horses you called in the 80s and why. Give us some good memories here.
Well, there's a couple of fillies and mares on my list. A Royal Heroine is the first one that I'd like to talk about. John Gosden trained her. He was based in California for probably much, if not all, a decade of the 80s. Now he's well known for bringing horses over from England for the Breeders' Cup. But back then he was a Southern California-based trainer. He got this Irish-bred filly, Royal Heroine. She had run a bunch of times overseas. She came to the U.S. She won a division of the Hollywood Derby before I worked there. She was a tremendous turf mare. She was the champion Eclipse Award turf mare in '84. She won the Breeders' Cup Turf at Hollywood Park. Never beaten on the Hollywood Park turf course. I called her in 3 wins, all graded races, all big races at Hollywood. Didn't get to call the Breeders' Cup, obviously. In those days, Tom Durkin called the races on PA and on television. But still, I mean, she was brilliant. She was obviously a tremendous miler, but she also ran second to John Henry in the Arlington Million, and also overcame a horrific spill at Santa Anita in March of '84, not long after she came to the U.S. Unfortunately, the other 2 fillies involved in the spill didn't make it, but she did, and came back from that to have this unbelievable campaign. And just her overall brilliance, her ability to set course records, puts her on my list for sure. Unfortunately for her, I was able to pull some video from the other 4 on my list, but '84 was kind of a non-televised year for Hollywood. We didn't have a replay show that year, and I do have a few races from '84, but not many, and unfortunately I don't have any video of me calling her.
Yeah, do you remember how many of her races you called?
I believe I called 3, the Inglewood, the Beverly Hills, and the Matriarch. They were a grade 1, a grade 2, and a grade 3, not in that order. Yeah. The Matriarch was the grade 1. 2 in the summer, 1 in the fall. I believe those were the 3. And, of course, I was there for the first Breeders' Cup. But, I was standing in the booth behind Tom Durkin trying not to sneeze or cough at the wrong time and mess up a national broadcast.
That might have ruined your career.
Yeah, and it would not have helped his stretch call either to have extraneous noise. No. But so yeah, that was really quite a thrill.
Okay, I looked her up. She won 10 of 21 starts overall, $1.2 million, which today doesn't seem like that much, but back then that was a lot more money. So that was very, very impressive. You sent me some video on that. We don't have a video of that one, you said, right? Yeah, we don't have that.
Yeah, that's the one that 84 was a little bleak, but I do have some from that year, but none of the other horses made the list, except one we'll talk about later.
Okay. I like the way going back and looking at those shows, how they took the camera and just ran program as they talked about who was in the race. Yeah. That was pretty cool. I remember that.
I tried to do that at Remington and got
shot down,
soundly beaten down over that, even though it is the best way for horse players to have a record, because
that's true.
But nonetheless.
Okay, Michael, we're going to go for your top 5 horses of the decade. Let's go 5 and we'll count down as we go in between.
Well, first I'm going to give you my honorable mention that just missed the list and probably just missed a Triple Crown because of a horrific trip in the Kentucky Derby. That's Risen Star. It was very near and dear to a lot of the folks here in Louisiana. Won the Preakness, won the Belmont Stakes, had a terrible trip in Louisville, and ended up, I still think, running fourth or fifth somewhere behind Winning Colors in that 1988 Kentucky Derby. Louis Roussel, of course, a legendary Louisiana horseman. That's my honorable mention that just didn't quite get on the list. My number 5 horse of the 80s is Lady's Secret, one of 2 distaff horses I have on this top 5 list. 25 wins and 45 starts, $3 million in purses. The 1986 winner of the Breeders' Cup Distaff also was Horse of the Year in 1986 because there was a big upset in the Breeders' Cup Classic that year when Skywalker pulled off the victory in front-running fashion. The sire of Lady Secret was Secretariat, so that's pretty good. The owner, Gene Klein, and the trainer, D. Wayne Lucas. Lady Secret kicks off my list of the 5 best horses of the 1980s with number 5.
And with an Oklahoma connection, right?
Is that
great?
Yeah, she's an Oklahoma bred. Yeah.
Yes, Oklahoma bred. Yes.
Yeah, very rare Oklahoma bred to win.
That's right. And to run at that level for an Oklahoma bred, especially at that time, was very impressive.
Hey, Jim, she would have been a monster on Oklahoma Classics Day, wouldn't she?
Yeah. As one of the clockers at Hollywood used to say, I think she could have beaten them running backwards. But
there you go. Absolutely.
Yeah. Lady Secret appeared in my early days at Hollywood in some sort of a weeknight, overnight stakes race named after some town there, the Cerritos or some such thing. And we thought, oh, this is an interesting gray Secretariat filly, bred in Oklahoma and all that. And little did we know that a couple of years later, she'd be Horse of the Year.
Yeah, she was awesome. Okay, Jim, what's your second horse we're going to talk about?
I might as well stay with the fillies and mention Melair. She's a filly that time may have forgotten, a Cal-bred filly, won all 5 of her career starts, all in 86. It happened to be the one of the 4 meets I worked at Hollywood in the summer. I did 4 fall meets as well. But Melair was a John Sadler trainee. Sadler, of course, has gone on to considerable note here. But he was a young trainer then, and this was a humble filly by a humble California stallion, and she was a gray and was really, really fast. And they eventually stretched her out. She won the silver screen at the expense of male rivals, one of whom was Snow Chief.
Melair is striding out as they come toward the wire. Melair still has a furlong to the finish, but she's in command by 6 lengths. Southern Halo is racing her determined second. Snow Chief down along the inside is third. He's going to be beaten today, but Melair is still undefeated. She's 5 for 5. Melair is in the clear from Southern Halo. Then Snow Chief and Marvin's Policy battling for third. It's all Melair and Patrick Valenzuela in the silver screen.
In his young prime. And she beat the pants off the boys in the silver screen, and that made her 5 for 5. And that was it for her. She never raced again. And, just a tremendous story, kind of coming up at the same time as Snow Chief did. It was kind of similar hard knocks, Cal-bred stories. And up to a 1-turn mile, she was tremendous. And she's always had a special part for me. Not the kind of stakes winner that these others were, but, for that brief period of time in the summer of 86, she was really neat.
Now, she was 5 for 5. I looked up in her career. All the races were at Hollywood, so you called every one of them, right?
Yeah, that was one of the few distinctions probably in my career, other than the ability to sit here and drop names 32 years or 35 years later. But yeah, I mean, it was amazing to be able to chronicle her, and she had a meteoric rise, but a really nice story. I think a couple of school teachers owned her. So like a very mini version of the Funny Side story with all the different school teacher owners. Really good story and a really good filly.
You remember who rode her?
Pat Valenzuela certainly rode her at the end. I sent you a race of hers in the silver screen. I think somebody else might have ridden her once. P-Val occasionally was, known to take a little time off back in those
That's
days.
A nice flip, wouldn't it? Yeah.
But I think either Pinkai or Gary Stevens might have ridden her once, but P-Val was her main rider.
Yeah, I was a main rider. I went back. I didn't know much about her until you sent me that tape, and I looked her up. I wonder why her career ended so early. Do you know?
I don't remember now. I assume it was some sort of an injury, and I also don't know if she ever produced any offspring. It would have been really interesting to see, and maybe we can look that up sometime for a later show.
There you go. All right, Michael, we're up to your number 4, greatest horse of 1980. Lay it on us.
My number 4 choice is actually the highest earner on my list of 5, having made over $6.6 billion in purses. That's Alysheba. 11 wins in 26 lifetime starts. Of course, won the Kentucky Derby in 1987 after almost falling over Bet twice, recovered in the stretch there, and managed to go on by Bet twice, then followed that up with a win in the Preakness before Bet twice got the better of him in the Belmont. Did win the Breeders' Cup Classic, that incredible Midnight Classic in 1988 at Churchill Downs. Tom Durkin's call, an all-time call, America's horse, Alysheba. He actually came this close to winning back-to-back Breeders' Cup Classics. It was in 1987 at Hollywood Park. He and Ferdinand, the 2 Derby winners, hit the line together. Ferdinand pulled out the photo. Sire of Alysheba, of course, Aladar, a great horse in his own right. Dorothy and Pamela Scarbauer, the owners, and Jack Van Berg, the trainer, another horse of the year, winning the honor in 1988.
Yeah, didn't we have to wait then till 2001 to Tisnow won back-to-back classics? Am I right?
Yes, he won in 2000 at Churchill, and then 2001 the Wins It for America call from Tom Durkin.
Right.
Is now,
I thought
yes.
that was the first back-to-back. I wasn't sure.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, Jim, we made it up to your number. Well, you don't have a number, but what's the next one you want to talk about?
Yeah, the next one I think will be Precisionist. He was a Florida bred. He was like Melair to a degree in a different realm, but very fast, who could carry his speed a long way.
They move to the furlong marker, and it's Precisionist with a clear lead. Precisionist by 3 lengths. Super Diamond, an excellent effort on the outside, now into second. Skywalker races in third. Harada's dropped back to fourth. They come to the wire, and Precisionist is life and death to hold off Super Diamond on the outside. Precisionist with the lead by a half length. Super Diamond to second. Precisionist in front in the Californian.
Precisionist was a horse that swept the Strube Series at Santa Anita, which were 3 races early in the year for newly turned 4-year-olds. I think the Strube Series has lost some of its luster in the last couple of decades, but it's the Malibu, the San Fernando, and the Strube Stakes, ever increasing distances from a sprint distance to a middle distance to a 1.25 miles in those days. I think there's only 3 horses to have swept that. Wonderful horse. He didn't always win. He was one of these, he answered the bell a lot, ran second a lot in big races, but was in a lot of the biggest races at Hollywood, races like the Gold Cup, the Californian. There's a main track horse. One of my best memories of Precisionist didn't involve a race that I called, but the 86 Breeders' Cup Sprint, or I'm sorry, the 85 Breeders' Cup Sprint. He came back off a layoff, and his trainer, Ross Fenstermaker, just brought him to the race on works. Couldn't get him to go the classic distance, and he'd already run in at least 1 Breeders' Cup Classic prior to that, I think in 84, but didn't have time to get him up to the Classic, so he just ran him in the sprint, and he goes and wins the race. Wow. He was an Eclipse Award winner. So a wonderful horse. Wound up being a failure at stud. He just basically was infertile. Sired, I think, 4 horses, I think Wikipedia said, and came back to the races in 88 after that failed experiment, wound up at Old Friends Farm, lived to be about 30 years old or something like that. Didn't live quite that long, but well up in his 20s.
Yeah. I looked it up. He won 20 of 46 starts and $3.4 million. Like you said, he always brought his A game. I watched some video of him. He was always a hard knocker. He lost the Breeders' Cup Classic. I looked it up twice, but he won that Breeders' Cup Sprint. So he was a very interesting horse. Anyway, okay, let's go on to Michael's. What are you up to? Number 3, Michael. What do you have?
Number 3, horse of the 1980s, and my second distaff runner on this list, Personal Ensign. 13 for 13 in her career. The first horse, I think it was in some 70 years, major winner to retire undefeated. Of course, we all remember that Breeders' Cup distaff in the mud at Churchill Downs that same day that Alysheba won the Breeders' Cup Classic. Personal Ensign runs down the Derby winner, winning colors in the stretch on a track she obviously did not like to win that 1988 Breeders' Cup distaff. Had 10 major stakes wins in her 13 races, $1.6 million in purses. First of 2 horses on this list owned by Ogden Phipps and trained by Shug McGahee.
Yeah, I bet I can guess who the other one is, too. The other one is going to get a mention in one of my other favorite horses.
There you go. And you know, right?
What's that?
Hey, you know who personal Ensign's jockey was, I'm saying.
Yeah,
Randy
unfortunately, the
Romero.
late Randy
Yeah.
Romero. Yeah.
Great
We
Randy
just
Romero.
lost him last year. I tell you a little story. I got to know Randy Romero here. He was a jocks agent here at Delta a few years ago for a young rider. Did some videos with him. I actually talked to him at Evangeline Downs. You might remember this, Michael. Last summer, he was in a wheelchair. His brother was pushing him around, and people were saying hi. And I stopped, had a nice conversation with him. And he said, and I'll regret it to this day, he said, call me. He goes, call me. You've got my number. Call me. I've got some stories to tell you. And he died just a few weeks later. I never got to call him. So I would have loved to have video of that. But what a great jockey. And I'll remember that for a long time. Okay, Jim, next to last horse.
Well, I'm going to go with Clever Trevor as my next horse. This horse isn't quite on the level of the Royal Heroines, the Precisionists, but, I mean, he was a Grade 1 winner.
It's Clever Trevor on the outside of Manastash Ridge. These two straighten away with the lead. Manastash Ridge along the inside. Clever Trevor to the outside. And at the furlong pole, Clever Trevor goes to the front. Manastash Ridge drops back second. Gauntlet Boy lodges a late rally on the extreme outside. But Clever Trevor leads it in the final strides. Gauntlet Boy is closing at him. Clever Trevor along the rail, though, is taking the Remington Park Derby.
Yeah. He had a phenomenal 89 season. Trainer Donnie Von Hemel was a huge favorite of mine and a favorite of a lot of us that worked at Remington. Mm-hmm. Clever Trevor was an Oklahoma bred. He was a gelding, helped put Oklahoma and Remington Park on the map racing-wise, won the first RP Derby, later won the Arlington Classic that year, Grade 1 race, won a Grade 2 race in 89 at Canterbury, wound up running in 89 in the Travers against Easy Goer and ran a really strong second.
Yeah.
You know, Clever Trevor was another speed. I seem to have a type. I like these speed horses that can go on a bit. Clever Trevor ran a really nice Travers and it was well back from him. He ran second to the rest of the field, and he shrugged off another speed horse who I'd totally forgotten, named Roy Danzig. And thankfully, that 89 Travers is available on YouTube in really good quality with Dave Johnson's call. And you can kind of hear Marshall Cassidy's call in the background a little bit as well. But Clever Trevor wound up having a long career. I kind of forgot until about a year or so ago. I looked at his PPs. He wound up running at Finger Lakes and Ellis Park when it wasn't very well known. And of course, he ran very early in his career at Blue Ribbon.
Yeah, I was going to mention.
Yeah.
How many horses ran at Blue Ribbon Downs and ran in the Kentucky Derby and the Travers?
Exactly. Yeah, and thanks for mentioning that. He ran in the Derby, ran in the Breeders' Cup Sprint, ran in the Molson Million at Woodbine when it was a massive race, and acquitted himself well in a lot of those. And so he's got to be on the list of anybody that follows racing around here.
When he ran in the Breeders' Cup Sprint, did he not get beaten by Sheikh Albadoo that year? I remember that. Yeah,
I know that because I looked the race up to prepare for this. I mean, to be honest with you. And I think Housebuster was the favorite that day and was up the track.
Yeah.
In fact, go ahead, Michael.
No, I believe Housebuster was injured in that Breeders' Cup Sprint as a part of the reason why he ran up the track. He had made his move coming off the turn, and I think he ended up having a pretty bad injury there that I don't know if he had to retire after that, but I know he was never the same after.
The chart comment, and this was the first year of Equibase, the first year you can look at charts on Equibase, said broken a tangle, which we usually use for quarter horse racing, but you know, it can be appropriate sometimes in thoroughbreds. And yeah, it did not go into the detail about a later in the race injury, but yeah, that was a shame. And he was odds on that day. And Trevor beat about half the field, I think, in that Breeders' Cup Sprint. I think he ran 6th in that race. So good effort. And he toured the country, and you know, he was a remarkable horse. Another one that lived on to have a really to a nice old age.
I'll always have him as a special place in my heart because I was standing by the rail on the finish line in the 1989 Remington Park Derby. Gauntlet Boy was closing. I went back and watched her call today, and I watched the Remington Report. I watched the races. I went out there all the time. I didn't know you, didn't get to meet you, and 5 years later, I met you, and then working with you, took me under your wing, and I've known you ever since. So Clever Trevor will always be a favorite horse of mine for many reasons, more than just all of his heroics on the racetrack. Okay, Michael, we're up to number 2 on you. Second greatest horse of the 80s.
Well, this was between these last two horses, as it was on the racetrack, it was not close again. And I end up with number 2 as Easy Goer. Another one owned by Ogden Phipps, trained by Shug McGahee. Another Aladar offspring. 14 wins and 20 starts. $4.8 million in purses, was the champion 2-year-old of 1988. And he is the only horse to win in the same year this following list of races: the Belmont Stakes, the Travers Stakes, the Jockey Club Gold Cup, the Whitney, and the Woodward. And in the last 3, he beat older horses in winning all 3 of them. So that is just a phenomenal list. And had it not been for the other horse on our list, I'm going to guess Easy Goer would have won a Triple Crown. Easy Goer would have had a lot more accolades through his career there. But Easy Goer was a special horse. And, he came along in the wrong year. Had he come along in a different year, and maybe history would be written a little differently.
Well, if I remember right, he was really a big horse, was he not? And he was ridden by Pat Day. And in fact, on Twitter, there's a lot of argument about whether Pat Day cost him some of those races, which Pat Day was.
And I know Pat has said in the Preakness that particular year, which in my mind is 1 or 1A of the 2 greatest races I've ever seen.
Great stretch
with him. Because that was just ding dong all the way through the stretch, as was the other race I'm thinking of, which was the affirmed Aladar Belmont in the late 70s. That's what horse racing is, because when you get 2 fabulous horses like that going nose and nose all the way down the stretch, and it's settled by a very small margin, it really is a thrill, and it really does bring what the sport is all about to the fore.
That's another one of those races I'll never forget, is that Preakness with Sunday Silence and Easy Goer, because I was standing in the paddock at Remington Park with my brother Jim, my late brother Dale, who passed away a few years ago. He would come up the press box. You remember him? And him and I, before I knew you, and before I was just a fan, was stood in the paddock down there at Remington Park. Big crowd on hand. It was, a Triple Crown race, and everybody was watching that. Just the cheer, the crowd. I mean, we were just simulcast watching it, and you'd think you were at a live race. It was absolutely amazing. What a stretch drive. Okay, the last horse on your list, Jim, is a horse that has a Louisiana connection, and what a workhorse. This horse raced a long time, and always brought his A game. Go ahead and talk about him.
Yeah, John Henry, for quite a while, the all-time leading money earner, until I believe Alysheba eclipsed him, and now you win 2 big races, you can become the all-time money winner. That's going to become meaningless. But, when that record meant something, being the all-time leading money earner was something. And, of course, his career spanned, he started in the late 70s. He was a 1975 foal.
Right.
I saw him race in person in 84 multiple times, and the fall of 83. When he was, 8 and then 9 years old. Horse of the Year at 9. He won 2 Santa Anita handicaps back in the days when he was a very good dirt horse as well as a turf horse. Ultimately, won, as I mentioned, the Horse of the Year at 9 when he was mainly a turf horse at that point. Won the first Arlington Million and then won it again 3 years later. And just a remarkable horse. One memory I have that I thought about this today. I was so privileged to be able to call him in 2 winning turf races at Hollywood, the Invitational and the Sunset, both of which now have different names, or they had different names at the end. I think the Invitational might be the Charlie Whittingham now. Not sure of that. I don't even know if the Sunset exists in any form at Santa Anita.
They're at the top of the stretch. Loose Ends with a short lead. Then it's Load to Cannons. Galaver on the outside. John Henry moving between horses. With 1/8 of a mile to go, there's 4 horses battling for the lead. Here comes John Henry moving along the rail, and Galaver on the outside. Galaver on the outside. John Henry on the inside. John Henry with a short lead. And John Henry does it again. Winner of the Invitational in 84 by a neck. Galaver second and Load to Cannons third.
But nonetheless, these were huge turf races, and he also ran a second in the Hollywood Gold Cup the first year that I was at the track. But my best memory of him is when I was on my way up. I worked a meet at Santa Anita. I was the 3rd string announcer behind Dave Johnson and Trevor.
Wow, you had 3 strings.
Yeah, well, Dave only called most weeks 4 days out of the 5. So he would miss a lot of Wednesdays, and so Trevor would call, and then I'd do a couple of races behind him. They loved having backups.
Cool.
Great. It really helped me. Yeah. They had a morning workout show at Clocker's Corner, which is still there, and people could get breakfast and they could watch the workouts. It was up near the gap where they stepped on the track for morning workouts. And John Henry every day would come out and gallop. He was obviously very recognizable. I knew his exercise rider. I knew what he looked like. And so every day I got to watch him stand there.
Oh, that's cool.
he would stand there and survey the scene, and he'd stand there for several minutes sometimes, just to one spot. And this was in the fall of 83, spring of 84. I don't even know if he was racing then particularly. He was just, in training for Ron McAnally, and that was a really good memory.
That's pretty cool. Now, his Louisiana connection, of course, he broke his maiden at Jefferson Downs in Kenner, Louisiana. First 2 races there, and I think he ran like 3 old Evangeline Downs, winning the Lafayette Futurity. So there's a lot of people, since I've been here Delta Downs 16 and a half years, that remind me, I was at that race. I saw John Henry, probably more people than were actually there, but they always tell those things like, I was there when he hit the home run. Yeah, right. More people. But that's your Louisiana connection. But really cool. Horse of the Year at 9. Isn't that amazing? Horses, if they're that good, they don't spend that much time. Of course, And who all the jockeys during his career? Do you remember, Jim?
Chris McCarron was the later best-known rider, but Shoemaker rode him in the first Arlington Million.
With the Bart?
Shoemaker and
Della in 1981? With the Bart?
The one with the Bart and Eddie Delahousse, right. And they missed by just, a whisker. Yeah. And Shoe rode him for a whole bunch of time, and then McCarron. Prior to Shoe, I think Darrell McCarg, who was a really good rider in Southern California for a while, later became a steward. And, of course, I think there was kind of a laundry list of guys earlier in his career, but Shoe and McCarron were the best known in the 80s at least.
Yeah, cool. Okay, Michael, we're up to your final one. Number 1, if I had a drum roll, I'd give it to you, but I think we've already tipped this one off.
Yes, I think we will go with number 1, Sunday Silence. 9 wins and 14 career starts. Beat Easy Goer in 3 separate races in 1989 to earn Horse of the Year honors that year. The Derby, the Preakness, and the Breeders' Cup Classic down there at Gulfstream. Charlie Whittingham, who Jim just mentioned, was the trainer. And, this horse this was the horse that, if I remember correctly, Charlie Whittingham hadn't been to the Derby in nearly 3 decades. Yeah. And the last time he had been there, he said, I'm not coming back until I have a horse that can win it. And this was the horse he brought back. And sure enough, he won it. And, Sunday Silence's Derby and the Preakness, as we've already mentioned, were tremendous efforts. He did get beat by Easy Goer in the Belmont rather convincingly. We mentioned Marshall Cassidy earlier. That was one of his more famous calls when he said, New York's Easy Goer, taking off to win the Belmont to defend that New York turf, which because Sunday Silence was the West Coast horse, Easy Goer was the East Coast horse. But Sunday Silence got the better of him 3 of the 4 times that year, $4.9 million in earnings, and just a tremendous horse. He had a very nice career also at stud, having been sold to Japanese interests not too long after the racing career ended. So Sunday Silence, not only on the track but off the track, very influential horse, and my number 1 horse of the 1980s.
I need to go back and look. You guys don't recall what the odds were in that Kentucky Derby. Wasn't Easy Goer favored?
Easy Goer was the favorite, I think, in the first 2, and then because I think in the Preakness, the people kind of decided that he didn't run his best race in the Derby because I think the track was a little off that day. So they decided to make him the favorite again in the Preakness. But Sunday Silence was the favorite in the Belmont, I believe, as the horse going for the Triple Crown that day. But yes, Easy Goer was part of an entry, by the way, of the Ogden Phipps stable in that race, with the horse that ran 3rd right behind him, a horse named Awe Inspiring.
Wow, that's a good trivia question there. I like that. Little trivia at the end from Michael there. So, okay, well, that was a lot of fun, guys. We've got about a 30-minute show. We talked about the 80s. We laughed a little bit. We told some stories. We had a lot of fun. Jim, thank you so much for joining us. Michael, you as well. This is getting to be a regular thing. If you guys have time when we're still quarantined, we might do this a few more times. But anyway, I want you guys to stay safe, stay home, do what you got to do to keep virus free. And we'll come back at you on the HorseManDon channel soon. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hit the thumbs up button if you like the video. Leave a comment below. We love seeing your comments, and we'll answer them. We're all on there. Have a great day, guys. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Next time.
A short lead. Then it's load to cannons. Galaver on the outside. John Henry moving between horses. With 1/8 of a mile to go. There's 4 horses battling for the lead. Here comes John Henry moving along the rail, and Galaver on the outside. Galaver on the outside. John Henry on the inside. John Henry with a short lead. And John Henry does it again. Winner of the Invitational in 84 by a neck. Galaver second and load to cannons third.